So this is an alliteration that I came up with a few years ago and I repeat all the time. It just helps me, but I think it's also helped my audience kind of give us the right perspective about politics. I say politics matter because policy matters because people matter. Politics affects policy. Policy affects people, and people matter. They matter to God and they matter to us. They matter because they're made in the image of God.
Love God, love people, love people, love people. It's the AC Podcast. For the love of God, love people.
Hi, welcome back to the AC Podcast. My name is Andy Steiger, and I am joined today with Wes Huff.
Back at it.
And we have a very special guest today, Allie Beth Stuckey. Welcome to the AC Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is so good to have you. Where are you joining us from today?
I'm in the great state of Texas right now.
Wonderful. And
Yes.
Now you have the Relatable podcast,
Yep.
and I guess you're kind of the conservative Christian. Like, how would you describe
Yeah.
yourself?
Yeah, so we analyze culture, politics, news, and theology from a Christian conservative perspective. And the podcast itself started in 2018. It started as once a week, and now we've picked up quite a bit more, and we do 4 times a week. But thankfully, that's not all on me anymore. My team has grown, and so we make it happen. And that's what we're still trying to do, though. The mission has stayed the same. We talk about some more evergreen topics, is what I would say. And so we talk about theology, we talk about what's going on in culture, we talk about parenting and motherhood and all of that good stuff. And then we also try to keep up as much as we can with what's going on in the news, but try to stay in that intersection of Christianity and politics. And I don't believe those two things are compartmentalized at all, but some stories kind of fit into that corner a little better than others. And so that's the lane that I try to stay in to the best of my ability.
Now, today we're going to talk about your faith journey. I'm really looking forward to that. But listen, this is a safe place. You can be honest with us. Tell me the truth. Do you ever just wake up some days and you're like, you know what? I don't want a podcast today.
Ooh, you know what? You know what my husband would say? He would say, if you did not have a podcast, you would be just talking to yourself about things in front of them or to him all day long. Because the truth is, when I go a week or 2 weeks, or sometimes we go 3 weeks without doing a show, I am like just filled to the brim with words. And that has always been true of me. I have always been a talker. That's what I got in trouble for growing up, was talking in class. And so thankfully it paid off. I knew that I always wanted to communicate. I've always loved public speaking. I have a lot of thoughts. I have a lot of things I want to say. And so no, actually, I feel that I don't even have enough time in the week to talk about all the things I want to talk about. Now, sometimes it depends on just the state of the world and the state of the news. There are definitely times when I'm like, I don't want to talk about anything important, or I don't want to talk about anything deep or anything sad, because a lot of that characterizes the news. And I don't have to. There are so many times when I choose not to talk about the news and just talk about, something theological or something like that. But yeah, for the most part, I would say, no, I love doing what I do. My husband would also say that it's not just that I would do it for free, I would pay to do it. And that is true.
Positive outlet in that way.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like my wife could relate to that. She doesn't have a podcast, but for the amount of words that are able to be said, she could have a podcast. But that's fine.
Let me ask you, how do you prep for your podcast? I mean, do you have a team helping you? Are you reading constantly?
Yeah. So before I had kids and it was really just me and like the camera person, I would spend like probably 5 to 6 hours per episode researching and writing out verbatim what I wanted to say. Now, I didn't read it during my podcast, but I would write out verbatim. And maybe that was like nervousness. I just didn't want to say something wrong and I was new at it, but that's how I did it. But then, of course, we have 3 kids now, and I just wasn't able to dedicate. I didn't want to dedicate that amount of time, and I wasn't able. And so we started having more guests, which always makes it easier. Like when I have someone like Wes on the show and I can just let him talk. Obviously, there's preparation that goes into it because I want to be able to ask the right questions, but having good guests really helps a lot because they can just take it away. But now I have a team. So it started out just me, but now I have a producer. I have an associate producer. I have an editor. I have a camera person. I have a director. I have a researcher, and I have a social media person. And so while of course I'm in charge of like the like what we're going to say, the direction that we're going to go in, I'm very thankful that now I have a much bigger team than I did 6 years ago, because I have different priorities. I have different things that I want to focus on. And so I get to come into the studio for a few hours a week and then do whatever I want, which is 99%, motherhood outside of the few hours that I spend on the show. It's still like a good portion of my time. My husband and I work together full time. And so we also work on the show together and work on everything else together, but it doesn't consume quite as many hours for me as it used to.
I think that's really great. And, a lot of our audience, I'm sure, is aware of your content. I've watched a good deal of your content. And even for those who might be aware of your podcast and some of the stuff you put out on social media and on YouTube, how did this whole faith journey start for you? What was the start of your not just coming into the work that you do now, but in terms of your own faith journey?
Yeah. So I'm very thankful that I was raised with Christian parents and even had my grandmother lived with me until I was 13. And she was also a huge influence on my life and very godly herself. And not only we're good Southern Baptists. And so we were in church probably 3 times a week, Wednesday night, Sunday morning, Sunday night. And then my parents also, they always said that they would do anything that they possibly could to give my brothers and me an explicitly Christian education. And so I also had that. And that is something I talk about all the time. I really credit my upbringing with the knowledge that I have of scripture, my scripture recall. I also note sometimes that even though I've been reading the ESV for my adult life, I got gifted an ESV study Bible when I was a sophomore in college. It's all I've read since then. Almost all of the verses that I have memorized, they come to mind in the NIV. And that is because that was the version that was used at church and in school growing up. And so I use that to remind myself, but also to remind other parents that the seeds that you're sowing in your children right now, like they take root, and that it really has an effect, and you're forming their minds in ways that's going to pay off in decades. So anyway, I'm very thankful for that. And I was baptized when I was 7 in the church that we were going to at the time. Very thankful for that. But like a lot of people who were raised Christian, there comes a point in your life when you start thinking about it more deeply than you had before. I think going to Awanas and memorizing scripture and knowing the Bible stories, I think that's all really good. But at some point, you start to ask deeper questions as your frontal lobe is developing, as you're learning more, as you start contending with apologetics questions, even in high school, which we did. Junior and senior year, our Bible class at school really gave us a lot of material to start thinking about apologetics questions, and you start taking it more seriously for yourself. And I was introduced to C.S. Lewis, I think, a sophomore. Well, I mean, we actually did read Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and all of that in middle school, but I'm talking Mere Christianity, Screw Tape Letters, Great Divorce, and that kind of thing, like probably sophomore or junior. And I would say C.S. Lewis was kind of like my gateway into the intellectual side of Christianity that, quite frankly, I didn't really know existed before that. I read my Bible and I would like to say that I was interested in it, but understanding theology and understanding that there's this whole rich intellectual history of Christianity, that all of my 16-year-old questions that I had that I thought were novel had actually been addressed and thought about and written about really for thousands of years. That was really fascinating to me, and I think really just strengthened my faith. And also, I know there's issues I have my own issues with Tim Keller, but his book, Reason for God, was really one of the first apologetics books that I read, and also realized there is a reason for this. It's not just because I was raised this way. It's not just because of what I was taught in Sunday school, but there is a good reason, a logical reason to believe that God exists and kind of everything flows from there. And so I would say I started taking my faith and studying scripture and trying to study theology seriously when I was a junior, senior in high school. And then thankfully, by the grace of God, that grew in college. Now, I do write about in my book, I had a period of time in college where I don't know if you would call it backsliding. I don't know if you would call it rebellion. I don't know if you would just, I don't know what you would call it, but it was that where I kind of decided that being like this goody two shoes Christian that everyone knew me as in college was like that. I wanted to try something else. I thought it was boring for a while. And there were a series of things that happened in my life at the time that I've written about before that just kind of made me think, I don't know, maybe I'm just going to, I'm going to find myself, you know. And so I went down this path that ultimately led me into having like a pretty serious eating disorder. And I didn't drink until I turned 21, but when I turned 21, I started to drink. And it just brought me into this world of the flesh, of loving sin, and that I really had never tried or tasted at all. And it was a lot, and just unhealthy relationships and really like the whole gamut. But it was the eating disorder that was like anorexia that went into bulimia that actually led me back to the Lord through this biblical counselor that I found through a search engine. Once I realized after a few months, I had graduated from college, I was working this job. Once I realized that I was really a slave to all of these things, that they weren't just things that I was enjoying. They weren't just things that, I could quit anytime I wanted, which is what I told myself. You don't have to, I don't really have to get drunk on the weekends, or I don't have to have this eating disorder. I'm in total control. And once I got to the point where I realized these things are in control of me, and this is not just a phase anymore. This is not just something I'm experimenting with in college, but this is now my life. And wait, hang on, who am I? This is not the person I know myself to be. This is obviously not why Christ died for me. And so it was really the eating disorder though that scared me, because it threatens your life. Oh, go ahead.
Let's talk
Please.
about that for a moment, because one thing that you're saying, Allie, that I think a lot of people could resonate with, especially if they've grown up in the church, is sometimes I think people think they don't really consider the idea that in Jesus we have offered to us a abundant life, as he calls it, or a flourishing life. I think there's some people that kind of go to church and think, oh, maybe the really good life is out there, you know, drinking, partying, that sort of thing. But as a Christian, I got to follow these rules because I got to make God happy so that I can one day go to heaven, sort of idea. Instead of the right idea being, hey, actually in Jesus, and if I follow Jesus, I'm going to experience the good life, the abundant life, and what it really looks like to flourish. Do you agree? Do you think that there was this idea, like what would have drawn you into kind of the party life? It's like, oh, okay, maybe I'm not getting the fullness of life by not going in that direction.
Yeah, I think that you're exactly right. I actually went through, when I was in college, went through this, like what I thought at the time was like this really difficult and monumental breakup. And I think that I had a lot of my identity and even faith wrapped up in this relationship, and also just in this reputation. I was like the chaplain for my sorority. I was always the designated driver, and all my roommates and all my friends just knew me as the girl who didn't drink. And I think after a while I thought, maybe I really am missing out. All of those friends who have been doing those things, and now I was single at this point, so which was also exciting. I was single for like the first time in college. And all of these friends seem a lot more carefree than I do. I'm super sad. They seem really happy. They're also offering to accept me and to make my sadness go away, because that's what you do when you're a girl and in college and you're sad and you feel rejected. Well, you should just go have alcohol and then you'll feel better, which you do for a little bit. And then you feel way worse after, but it becomes this cycle. And so you're absolutely right. I mean, but it was bigger than just like worldly pleasure for me. I think it had a lot to do with identity and confidence in who I am in Christ. But ultimately, all sin does come down to not trusting God. And that's certainly what it was for me.
Could you give listeners maybe a little bit more insight into an eating disorder? Like what drives that?
I think it can be a variety of things. I mean, I've heard people say that it's control, and there could be things in someone's life where they feel out of control, and this is the one thing that they think that they have under their like autonomy. That was probably what it was for me, but I also think it's a more superficial than some people want to admit. A lot of it is just appearance. You think that you look good, and other people start telling you that you look good, and you get addicted to affirmation. I think that's part of like what it is. That's what it starts out as. And then for me, it became this thing that like I couldn't stop doing, because the last thing, again, people don't want to admit that sometimes it's this superficial. The last thing you want to feel is fat. You don't want to feel fat. And so you do whatever it takes. You give up whatever it takes to not feel like that. You want to feel empty. You want to feel small. And it might be for aesthetic reasons. Maybe for some people, it's for much deeper reasons. For me, it started out as very vain and superficial. And then once it became bulimia, which is like binging and purging, that's when it becomes really psychological. And I could not stop. It became an addiction. And that's what led me to the counselor.
It's interesting that, it all comes down to, as First John says, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life, right? Those alluring temptations that there's something else that's better that could give you that fulfillment, whether it's body image or, the carefree lifestyle or friendship or what have you. In terms of the catalyst where that switch toggled for you in realizing the emptiness of these worldly things, is there an instance or a time that you would say was concrete for you where that onboarding of, oh, this is not giving me what I want? How does Christ give me what I want in terms of his pursuing of me? Can you think of a time frame or an account that speaks to that?
I think it was building up. And of course, you only see these things in retrospect. But certainly starting to feel worse and worse about myself every time I was hungover. Every time I had a new guy whose attention I was just desperate for, and whose acceptance I was desperate for, because I really had never been like that my whole life. And just starting to look at myself in the mirror and being so embarrassed by the fact that I couldn't stop binging and purging, which again, I kind of had prided myself before that on being this independent, self-assured, confident person who would never do something out of insecurity or desperation. And so seeing myself as that and being embarrassed by that, and again, maybe that the embarrassment maybe even came from pride, but I do think that started to make me question, who am I? And am I really turning into this kind of person? I think it's C.S. Lewis that talks about every little choice that you make turns you into some kind of person, but you don't realize that in the moment. And you don't want to realize that. You convince yourself that these choices are completely independent from who I am. And yet I realized that, I am this kind of person who can't get out of this myself and needs a counselor. I think the defining moment was when, after a few sessions of my counselor listening and empathizing and talking to me about my story, I showed up and she had a stack of papers and she said, "You are going to die." She was like, "You're going to die. Bulimia is the most deadly form of eating disorder." And I didn't look emaciated. That's the thing about bulimia. You can get away with it because you don't look emaciated. But she said, "This is bad for your body, and you're going to die. And you are 22 years old. And unless you want to call your parents and tell them that you're in the hospital because you're dying from bulimia, then you should stop this." And that is so not the therapy approach that most people have today. But I think back to that and just her willingness to possibly hurt my feelings and risk me standing up and walking out and saying, "You're not being empathetic enough." I'm just thankful for that. And obviously it's not everything turned around in that moment, but it did wake me up. And I will say that after that moment, everything else, the drinking and everything, kind of fell away later on. But the eating disorder stopped cold turkey, never looked back, never had another moment where I ever did that or ever struggled with it again. Not that I never had body image issues or insecurity or vanity, but never, ever, ever did I binge and purge after that. And I think I just needed someone to look at me and tell me the hard truth because she loved me. And so that's a pivotal moment that always comes to my mind.
Hey, man, if somebody's listening to this podcast and maybe they're dealing with their own body image issue, what kind of advice would you give them? And when would you say, "Hey, you probably should go see a counselor"?
Well, certainly if you have any kind of disordered eating. You don't have to be diagnosed by a doctor, but food can be an idol, whether you are restricting yourself to punish yourself or whether you are overeating. If it's a cycle that you cannot get out of, and I would just recommend too seeking a biblical counselor, not just a Christian counselor, but a biblical counselor, because they are specifically trained in counseling from the Bible. And so I would encourage someone to find a biblical counselor. I don't think you even have to reach a certain threshold before you seek a biblical counselor, though. A lot of people have disordered eating and they don't even realize it. They just have an unhealthy relationship with food, whether it's gluttony or anorexia. And so I think a biblical counselor can be helpful for lots of people, but certainly if you're binging and purging, I know that you're embarrassed by it. I know that you're trying to hide it because I did that for a long time, but bringing it out into the light is a huge step in stopping, because no one wants to admit that. No one wants people to hear that. No one wants people to walk in on that. So once you bring it into the light, you are well on your way to being free from that.
Hey friends, Wes Huff here. Our annual AC conference in Abbotsford, British Columbia is only 2 weeks away. Can you believe it? On March 7th and 8th, we're going to be talking about a theology of technology with speakers like our very own Andy Steiger, Gretchen Huizinga, Sebastian Vidova, Ruslan KD, myself, and many more. Can't make it in person? We have you covered. Make sure to head over to apologeticscanada.com/conference25-BC to register for the live stream and pre-order your recordings of the conference. On top of that, our annual Ontario Apologetics Canada Leadership Summit up at Camp Madiba is happening May 30th to June 1st, and registration is now open. Our Leadership Summit seeks to bring together aspiring Christian thought leaders from across the country for an incredible weekend of networking and equipping. This is an opportunity for young professionals and student leaders aged 19 to 30 to meet one another and to grow together as Christian leaders. Join myself and a handpicked group of mentors and teachers for an incredible weekend of fellowship, teaching, and equipping. But space is limited. We can only accept a certain number of applicants, so make sure you're heading over to the AC website homepage to find out how to apply. All information on either the BC Conference or the Leadership Summit can be found at apologeticscanada.com.
Now, you said that you grew up in a Christian family. Did you have a good relationship with your mom and dad?
Yes, and I still do have a great relationship with my parents.
It's kind of interesting because often you hear where, especially a lady will have an identity, deal with an issue of identity, and as you said, this desire for attention from men. Normally, that's an indication that they don't have a good relationship with their father or parents. But you did. What do you think the catalyst was there?
Well, I don't know if that's something that I struggled with growing up, like as a teen. I think I really had never been single, like in my life. I always just had, steady boyfriends, and then having this freedom, and also last semester of college and getting a little taste of the affirmation that came with losing weight and all of that. It was just, I don't know, it just kind of combined together. For a season of sin, like you said, lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes. And I wouldn't say that my dad and I had a perfect relationship in high school. I'm, very strong-willed, and he is as well. We're very similar in a lot of ways, but actually our relationship in college really flourished. I think, I don't know, we had some space because I went away to South Carolina for college. But we have an amazing relationship now. I actually think that a lot of women struggle with wanting different kinds of affirmation and acceptance, certainly more so if they have father problems. But no matter what their background is, I think it's a struggle for a lot of women.
Yeah, Allie, as you and thank you for sharing that and being transparent about those things. As you came to the realization of the identity issues you had and that something needed to change, that leading into something like where you are today in terms of what could arguably be described as a ministry, in terms of the approach that you take with the Christian perspective that you bake into your content in a very helpful, practical way. What were the steps then from going to, realizing coming out of college that
Yeah.
there were these steps that need to be taken to changing, and then a feeling that, I don't know if you'd describe it as a conviction or just like a desire to get involved in something proactive that actually spoke to others. What was that exactly?
Yeah. So around the time, so I kind of saw a counselor maybe at the end of the summer after college, and things started turning back around by the grace of God. And again, he used like the reintroduction of C.S. Lewis books into my life, like Screw Tape Letters, to just realign me with what I knew was true. And I started a few months after that, I started leading a Bible study of young women who were freshmen in college. And looking back, I'm like, was I even in a place to do that? I don't know. But I started leading a Bible study of freshman girls who were so sweet. And this was 2014, 2015. And 2015 was the start of the infamous election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And my dad was in the Texas state legislature when I was in college. We grew up pretty familiar with politics, and I'd always been interested in that. And again, I love to public speak. I gave my commencement address at my college graduation. And so I was paying attention to everything that was going on. And it was especially interesting living in a college town. But as I was leading these girls in a Bible study, who were all very sweet, godly girls, one of the girls who is now like a conservative, strong Christian mom and all of that. Well, she told me in our Bible studies, she was like, I love Bernie Sanders. And the Bernie Sanders, for people who don't know, he is the like avowed socialist, super far left on every issue. And I remember thinking at the time, I didn't even know it was possible for someone to be a Christian and to think that they are a socialist or think that they're a liberal. And this girl was very, for her age, like biblically wise. And so as I was talking to them and realizing, they don't really have any sense of what the Bible has to say about abortion or about any of these issues, and talking to this young woman about her thoughts about the issues, I was like, this is something that I'm really passionate about, that I've always thought about, that I would love to write about and think about. And so it just kind of started as talking to this group of Bible study girls, many of whom I still talk to this day, about what was going on in the election. But then about a year later, after I got married, I met my husband, got married to my husband, I just still had this itch of like, I love to write. I love to public speak. I was working full time in PR. And before the election, I started reaching out to sororities. I lived in this college town, and asking if I could come speak at their chapter meetings and give a presentation about why they should vote and how Christians should think about these issues. And I was just doing that for fun. It was like a hobby. But that's how it all started in 2015 and then 2016, and started a blog, and it all kind of grew from there. And it's always been theology and politics, but I would say the theological aspect was even more probably starting when the podcast started in 2018. So yeah, that's kind of what that's how it started, and that's what it's grown to be.
You guys got married in 2015?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so
did
it's
my
very
wife
quick.
and I.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
So coming up on 10 years.
Yeah, coming up on 10 years.
Yeah.
Doesn't feel like a day over 9 years.
I know. We just filmed an episode together. We did like a Valentine's Day episode together. And we were talking about like how we met and all of that stuff. And yeah, a lot happens in 10 years.
Yeah, that's for sure. We won't talk about how long Andy's been married.
Yeah. 24 years. 24 years.
That is awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Allie. So, Allie, then what was there? I guess a couple things coalesced. Your faith sort of solidified, and at the same time, you saw the importance of engaging faith in your, the way the way you live in the world, and as it plays out in politics.
Yes, that is exactly right. And like I said, like all the interests that I had were already there. They were kind of already lined up. But I do think like my husband just gives me so much confidence, and really just believed that I should and could do this, and could start talking to people. And he always has been, like, we've always just worked together. And I think he also he gave me like the comfort and security to go out on a limb and do something, like ask sororities if I could come talk to them. And so, yeah, that's all of those things kind of converged at the same time about 2015.
I always find that interesting, how there is often that passion that comes when you really give yourself to Jesus. And it's one of those things that you just need to kind of take a step of faith. If you, because as you were saying, was I qualified? Well, I mean, are we ever really qualified?
Yeah.
It seems like it's always just a step of faith, and Lord, I'm going to be faithful in this moment you have me in, and we'll see where that leads.
Yeah.
Let me get into more of a contentious issue to see how you navigate just the issue of
I'm ready.
politics and faith these days, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we hear the term Christian nationalism thrown around a lot
Yeah.
these days, and I mean, people define that in all sorts of ways. Maybe I don't know, what your definition of that would be, but it does seem like there's this balancing act between, am I an informed Christian that is engaged in society versus somebody like a Jehovah's Witness that, I don't know if you know much about the Jehovah's Witnesses, but they are not, and I'm not putting them in the camp of Christian, just to be clear.
Yeah.
They just want to have nothing to do with politics at all. They just want to live in the society. They're not going to vote. They're not going to be involved in politics at all. And I've had them at my door, and I've challenged them on this. It's nice to live in a democracy. It's nice to live in a free place, but not to be involved seems pretty short-sighted to me. And then, so you got, on the one hand is, okay, an informed Christian that's engaged in society politically. And then on the other end, though, is this idea that politics is going to save you, that we can create a utopia, and that, where you have kind of the faith mixing in an unhealthy way with politics. So how would you tease that out?
Yeah. So this is an alliteration that I came up with a few years ago, and I repeat all the time. It just helps me, but I think it's also helped my audience kind of give us the right perspective about politics. I say politics matter because policy matters because people matter. Politics affects policy. Policy affects people, and people matter. They matter to God, and they matter to us. They matter because they're made in the image of God. And you just made a really good point right there. It's nice to live in a democracy. Well, for babies in the womb, it's nice to live in a place where they have the legal right not to be murdered. For kids who might be deceived about their gender, it's really nice to live in a place that makes it illegal for a doctor to profit off of mutilating their bodies. All of these things that really aren't primarily political issues, but are really Genesis 1 issues, Genesis 1:27 issues, abortion, the definition of marriage, the definition of gender, they're really all answered in Genesis 1:27. All of these things are non-negotiables for the Christian, and the fact that they have entered into the political realm means that Christians have a say and should have a role in the political realm, because these are primarily creation order issues, not even just theological, they're creation order issues. They shouldn't even be debatable at all among Christians. And for those who say, well, that's well and good, you believe that, but that has nothing to do with society. That has nothing to do with like how we run politics. And I think that's so wrong theologically and so wrong logically, because if God created the heavens and the earth, then nothing can be compartmentalized away from him. That means if he's the creator of all of it, he has the authority over all of it. He alone gets to say what is and what isn't, what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad, when life begins, and what a woman is. He gets to define all of those things. And if we as Christians believe that, it's a core tenet of Christianity, then it doesn't really make sense for us to compartmentalize that belief in God's total authority away from politics, which again affects the very people that we are called to love. So I think Christian nationalism, like you said, it's used in a million different ways, but it is a manipulation tactic to get conservative Christians and conservative Christians alone to shut up. Because progressive Christians are never told to leave their ideas about loving the foreigner or about socialism, being modeled by the early Christian church. Like, they're never told to leave those beliefs at the door. They're never told that that's Christian nationalism when you have like these preachers at churches bringing Kamala Harris up there, and Kamala Harris is saying, we've got joy coming in the morning, and she's talking about herself like she is the joy that was supposed to be coming in the morning when you elect her. That's not Christian nationalism. It's fine to use the Bible for progressive ends, but when you use the Bible to actually support biblical principles that are considered conservative, that's the only time it's dangerous in Christian nationalism. So that's why I think Christians should just ignore that intimidation tactic altogether, unless, as you said, it's really being used to like unless you're really making politics your idol, But I don't see that among most Christian conservatives. I think they see politics as a mean to an end that is more righteousness and peace and prosperity and freedom for our neighbors.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that answer and
Mm-hmm.
the trickiness of the navigating of that. As we kind of land this plane, draw it to a close, I do have a question in terms of a little bit of a different direction, because your audience, I mean, I think is mostly female, but is a lot of young people. And I'm seeing, and we actually, you and I, Allie, talked about this on your podcast too, is that seems to be a different kind of direction that the young people, the Gen Z, and I don't know what the generation under them is going in, that we see a movement almost as if they're looking up the line at the generations above them as what they don't want to kind of follow. I saw an interesting statistic the other day that said that only 20% of Gen Zs are drinking. And that they're almost like rebelling against that, their dad drinks and, they don't want to be a loser like their dad. And so how would you, as someone with a platform that speaks, very powerfully to young conservative people, direct them in the right way to not just reject liberalism because that's part of what they see as modernity, any more than they should reject modernity because that's secular, but actually pursue conservative Christian values?
Yes. So I see a big realignment among a lot of people because of not just because of Gen Z. And I think they just see a lot of the craziness of progressivism. And they're like, yeah, I don't want to go there. It's almost like nerdy to be liberal among a lot of Gen Z and even younger. I think it's Gen Alpha. And so that's fine. If that gets you there, I'm glad for that. But you're right. That's not far enough, because it's not enough to be non-liberal. It's not enough to be conservative. I actually think we see in a lot of the Trump world that Christless conservatism is really just progressivism light. They took off the T off the LGBT page of I don't know, the State Department or something. I'm like, okay, 1 down, 3 to go. And it's probably not gonna happen, because that's just not where Trump is. And so I see my role in Christian conservatives' role, especially with the MAHA movement, the Make America Healthy Again. We've got people coming over to the Republican side that are pro-choice, that are progressive in a lot of ways, but they appreciate a lot of what, Republicans and conservatives are doing. I'm like, awesome. I accept you, but I don't want us to move toward you. I want you to move toward us. And I think that's possible because I get messages, a lot of messages, even from prominent people in that movement, saying, I'm starting to think differently about abortion because I started to question, whatever, maybe it's even just what the CDC tells me. And then I started to question what the media tells me. And then I started to question what these activists tell me. And I started to wonder about when life begins, all of that stuff. So I think it can happen. But our role over here, I think as Christian conservatives, is not primarily to win elections. If you want to win elections, then yeah, you should compromise on marriage and compromise on abortion and all of that. It's to be the anchor, to make the Overton window shift over here and to hold it there, and to make everyone else move in our direction by holding the line when it comes to language, when it comes to life, when it comes to marriage. And it's possible. The fact that people are talking about Obergefell, the Supreme Court decision that legalized gay marriage in 2015, they're talking about the possibility of that being debated and overturned, means that the culture has shifted in our direction. But we want people to be spiritually there. We want people to be theologically there. And we also want people to be politically there. But we've got to be an anchor, risk making people mad. I'm so glad I'm not in politics because I don't want to try to win elections. There's a lot of compromising that has to happen in order to win elections. I don't want to do that. I want politicians to feel like I've got to appease this Christian conservative crowd over there with my policies. And so I have a very small role to play in that, but that is part of what I see my job is in the media landscape.
Do you see appreciate that answer, by the way. And do you see in, the culture wars that we're in the midst of, that it can be difficult not to get entrenched and actually angry and mean? Because that's something I've also seen with young people in particular, because they've grown up in this combative culture wars, that it can be difficult for them to maintain a view of the humanity of the people that we want to win over and not just beat up.
Yeah, but I also think like conservatives have been told for a very long time now that they are literally Nazis by some people, and it's easy
Oh, I
to
know.
no. Oh no, I'm not. Yeah, I wasn't
I'm saying
arguing against you.
it
I
just would
think
naturally make you angry.
yes, it would naturally, and I think that's probably what happens is that like conservatives always feel like on the defense, and so
Yep.
they feel like they have to kind of like be, I don't know, mean or be super aggressive in order to communicate like I don't care what you call me, even though that person that they may be talking to is not the kind of person that will call them Nazi, whatever. But I do think for me, I have to remember this is just me, and I bet a lot of people are in my same boat, that sassiness and sarcasm are not fruits of the spirit. I think there's a place for sarcasm. I think Jesus shows us that there is a place for sarcasm, but it can be used as a scalpel, or it can be used as, a mallet, like as a tool of destruction. And I have a very sharp tongue, and I could eviscerate my enemy, or I would want to, and I do have to be careful about that. And I have not been perfect, but I've actually had to tell my team, they used to play me these like reaction clips, like these liberals saying ridiculous things, and I would react to them. And I'm like, I cannot do that after I've recorded an episode or 2 episodes, because that's when I'm tired and that's when I'm frustrated, and I end up saying things that are really mean. And when I look at the clip after, I'm like, that was not helpful at all. And so I'm not going to post that. And so we have to understand our limitations and our propensity towards sin, because at the end of the day, like we are held to account for the things that we say, even to our enemies. And that's something for me to keep in mind too.
Hey, thank you so much for being on the AC podcast today. It's been great having you.
Thank you for having me.
I'm sure people would love to hear more from you. I know you got some new books out.
Yeah.
Where would you send them? What book would you recommend, given our conversation, and where would you send people to hear more?
Yeah, I have 2 books. The first one is You're Not Enough and That's Okay, Escaping the Toxic Culture of Self-Love. And so we do talk about my testimony and eating disorders in there, but we go through 5 myths of the culture, like you're enough, you're perfect the way you are, you determine your own truth, can't love your neighbor until you love yourself. So I think that's a great one, especially for the maybe like non-political people in your life. That's not a very political book. And then my second book, Toxic Empathy, How Progressives Exploit Christian Compassion, is explicitly political. And we go through 5 big cultural political issues and what progressives say about them, and then what the Bible and what truth says about them. So Toxic Empathy, You're Not Enough, they're available everywhere. Then my podcast Relatable is on YouTube and wherever you listen. My website is alliebethstuckey.com. So if people just remember that, they can find all the information that I listed there.
Wonderful. Again, thank you for being on the show, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll have you back again. The AC Podcast has been a ministry of Apologetics Canada. We will come back next week with more things to think about. Until then, love God, love people. Bye for now.
It's the AC Podcast.